without further ado, I welcome the first speaker of the affirming team, sorry.
A woman who is content with the way she looks without makeup should not be told that she simply doesn't take care of herself, that she should learn to practice self-care. These insidious ideas are what perpetuates harmful social expectations. We stand strongly against this hijacking of the self-care movement. What do we think the counterfactual looks like? We think two things broadly. The first is to say that beauty routines would largely have remained part of the realm of the beauty world. That is to say, makeup and skincare would remain advertised as for beauty and for aesthetic purposes. The second is that self-care trends that existed would have instead placed greater emphasis on other things that already existed. For instance, routines like doing daily yoga in the morning or mindfulness as a means to rewind, as opposed to doing beauty routines in the morning. Okay, 3 points for the house. First, on how this has worsened harmful societal expectations and norms. Second, how it has reduced the capacity for actual self-care. Finally, how it has worsened inequities in self-care. First, then, on how it worsens harmful societal expectations. Contextually, what does the rise of beauty routines and self-care trends looks like? It looks like four things. The first is to say that it's primarily centered on social media, predominantly for the youth, on platforms such as TikTok and Instagram. The second is that it often has things like creators describing their own routines of makeup or describing products and routines that they think are good and that other people should follow every day to feel good. The third is that they have now seen an increasing rise of things like sponsorships and influencer promotion of such narratives. And the fourth is the repackaging of existing makeup and beauty products as an element of self-care as opposed to beauty. This looks like the fact that these products aren't often created for self-care, but were simply once advertised as for aesthetic purposes, now being advertised instead as being, look, this will make you feel good in the morning, this is a good routine for you to take part in. Okay. What this concretely looks like is messaging to youth on how wearing makeup isn't for aesthetic reasons, it's to feel good and to refresh. We also think it's the incentives of companies that benefit from this to proliferate this narrative, to increase their sales as much as possible, to reach as many young people on these platforms as they can. What have the impact been on individuals? Two things. The first is this constant messaging that this beauty is actually about taking care of yourself. That it's not about necessarily your skin looking good, isn't about your skin looking good as being just being something that you want for other people to see. That is about taking care of yourself, and if you don't do that, you aren't taking care of yourself. The second is praise for those who do so, and praise for these routines of self-care as being beauty routines. Okay. What has this meant? It has meant that companies have leveraged these beauty standards as self-care and have enabled the insidious co-option of the movement. The idea that they have repackaged their products once for beauty purposes as an element of taking care of oneself. What are the harms of this? Two things. The first is to say the proliferation of messaging that makeup is about taking care of yourself means that you no longer get as effective counter messaging like that women don't need to wear makeup, or that this isn't actually something that we should be perpetuating in society. And second, that it leads to things like narratives that are not taking part in this, not having these beauty routines, means you simply aren't taking good care of yourself. Okay. This perpetuates this idea that women without makeup aren't taking care of themselves, that they shouldn't go into society. And it's particularly worse because self-care is framed as being good for you. It's no longer just about that women should look beautiful in their daily lives because that is what is expected of them. It's that they should look beautiful and look good in their daily lives because that means they're taking good care of themselves, and that we want to promote that, when in reality, that is not self-care. That is the insidious co-option of the movement to suggest that buying these consumerist products, perpetuating beauty standards, is what has led to self-care. This means that the narrative returns to a regressive era of things like these being promoted in society that have nothing to do with what the movement is actually about. The impacts of this are things like women, particularly young girls, feeling the idea that looking pretty is how to take care of themselves and shunning those who don't do that. It means you have the self-esteem of impressionable young people scrolling TikTok who think they are unclean, who think that they need to fix their problems by taking part in these narratives, buying these products, and by looking pretty. We stand strongly against this idea. Second, then, on how it reduces the capacity for actual self-care. Contextually, in the absence of this beauty standard, we note the counterfactual includes greater versions of other things of self-care. Beauty routines are endearing and most proliferated in the status quo because of things like three things. The first is that alluring promotion built from companies wanting to make profit, built from these sponsorship incentives. The second is a consumerist desire that does exist for a quick fix. Things like people going on shopping trips to get a shopping high, things like people making themselves look good to feel good in the short term. The final thing is these narratives that are built, this idea that if you look good, you'll feel good. What has this meant? and has meant that other means of self-care have been neglected, particularly things that require more effort to receive the feeling that you get in the short term from this quick fix. Things like mindfulness routines, yoga routines, simple rewinding tactics like reading a book or watching a movie, or increasing your connection with friends and family. These are all other narratives or routines that self-care has tried to promote that have been suppressed by the focus on looking good, that's suppressed by the focus on 30-minute daily routines that everyone is telling you have to do in order to take care of yourself, in order to feel good in society. It's important for two reasons. The first is to say, principally, we think these things are what the self-care movement is actually claimed to be about. It's claimed to be about living your life to the fullest extent, making better and more meaningful connections with your friends and family. We think that is what you achieve when you have mindfulness and take time out of your day to rest and relax, not to take time out of the day to make your skin look paler or more tan, depending on what you want. The second is to say the practical outcomes of better long-term outcomes when you have things like mindfulness and yoga are significantly and evidentially better. For instance, yoga improves strength, which improves your health. Mindfulness improves your mental health. There is nothing on the comparative to suggest that makeup and beauty does that. Instead, all it does is provide this short, temporary feeling for individuals that doesn't bring them any good in their life, that is forced upon them. We also note here, these better long-term outcomes are things that are not dependent on this continued proliferation of consumerism. This looks like the fact that you don't have to do yoga every day to feel stronger, but that if there is a narrative that exists that self-care looks like beauty routines every morning, that you constantly have to purchase these products, constantly have to do this in order to feel like you're still taking care of yourself. Comparatively, these beauty routines are therefore dependent on this profit and narrative, meaning they perpetuate the cycle of needing to do this every single day, not to reach a point where you actually feel rested and cared for, just that you must keep on doing this or else you aren't taking care of yourself. But this is extremely harmful. The impacts are it stops people from actually seeking good ways to feel better, and it has people fall into the trap that their lives will improve if they only had the newest Chanel eye mask, these new routines that they could possibly buy and make their lives better. That is not how this works. They neglect their friends and family in favor of these other things that society tells them they have to do. They neglect them in favor of quick fixes. We stand strongly against this. The final point then is on how it perpetuates inequities. Contextually, these routines cost a lot of money and have been getting worse on this front. This looks like the fact that these have now expanded from simple one-step wash your face or wear a face mask to elaborate 10-step routines on how to look as polished as possible, look as good as possible in modern society with consumers and makeup being promoted. This leads to two outcomes for perpetuating inequity. The first is they either cannot afford these things and therefore don't purchase them, leading to things like fueling the narrative that poor people are simply dirty and don't take good care of themselves, and that they would feel better in society if only they took the time out of their day to, like a privileged person could, spend half an hour making themselves look as good as possible before heading to their job, and that would somehow fix their life. Or the second outcome is that they do spend money on these quick fixes that don't solve anything except to take their limited disposable income, attempting to make themselves feel better, when in reality, all they have done is buy into this narrative that has harmed them in the past and will continue to harm them in the future. We think that there is no way you can stand for the insidious co-option of this narrative by companies to make profit. We prefer self-care to focus on things that actually improve your life. We are extremely proud to propose.
We thank the speaker for their speech, and we invite the first speaker of the game to give their details.
Auckland has done plenty of decent analysis of how these things might manifest themselves in the real world, but they've done very little analysis of exactly why these feelings of like beauty standards, etc., exist in the first place, and how they would reveal themselves in the cultural zeitgeist if this idea of self-help was not the way it was packaged. Canterbury stands for self-help as a uniquely empowering vessel for these messages to be communicated to viewers, so proud to negate. 2 points for you today. Number one, how this messaging is a net positive to its consumers, and number two, how it directs people positive messages as part of a self-help community, as well as just a positive means of looking good, such as drinking water, etc. Note that this will engage with that point on its repressing other narratives. But before I do that, I'd like to do a little bit of setup. So then, what do self-care influencers look like? One, they are either people who care about mental health and like their viewers and improving their lives, or people who rest their image on projecting the image that they care about mental health and their viewers, right? What that means is that in general, they're going to try push whatever narratives and views will maintain the audience and the public perception that they're trying to help out mental health, meaning that that will generally be the content they will try to put forward, content that they think will do this thing. Two, that it is going to be adjacent to the feminist movement insofar as self-care is a uniquely feminist idea. As in the patriarchal system, women's social role is generally to care for others and not for themselves. This is uniquely rebellious to that idea. This is why we tend to see self-care, etc., kind of adjacent to girl boss movements, etc., because I think it's fair to say that feminism and self-care are deeply entwined. What this means is that audiences who buy into self-care ideas are then really uniquely willing to push back on these ideas when they go anti-feminist because of cancel culture mechanisms. What this looks like is that influencers that portray particularly bad ideas being pushed back against and punished by society in general once those ideas are if those ideas are in fact too anti-feminist. Therefore, when we have these kinds of self-help influencers, they then kind of present these ideas through the lens of it's fun to dress up, or you're beautiful no matter what, but me personally, I love makeup as a source of creativity instead of dressing up like this is important to look good. Looking good is inherently a good thing. What is the counterfaction they have to stand for? Well, if the self-care movement disappeared entirely today, or at least dropped their focus on beauty routines, the cultural beauty standards that drove a demand for these videos to be made by the self-care movement would still exist. What this looks like is a teen girl Googling makeup tutorials would still stumble across some video that hits that niche, but instead of it being from a self-care influencer, on our side of a house, it would be from just a regular influencer, a regular beauty influencer on their side of a house. What that means is that uniquely, our videos are going to be packaged through a self-care lens. This means four things. One, that on their side of a house, they're going to be missing a lot of the positive self-care messaging I'm going to be expanding on in my speech. Two, that their messaging is not going to be aligned with the feminist movement and the pushback and cancel culture mechanisms I've explained. Three, that actively bad messaging, how to look good, you've got to wear makeup to look good for your man, not to help out yourself, is going to be more likely to be part of these videos. And four, it doesn't funnel viewers into the positive mental health stuff that these creators also make. Before I get onto my points, a little bit of rebuttal. Firstly, they've claimed that other narratives have been suppressed by beauty movement's involvement in them. I think this is really untrue. Firstly, because a lot of people are interested in things like makeup tutorials, things like how to clear up acne, and so that's going to be a lot of people watching these videos, which then get funneled onto later videos once they're the content creator. And also, though, they've also claimed that it creates this narrative that if you don't care about yourself if you don't wear makeup. I think if you give that criticism to any self-care creator, they'll all have the same response, and they'll probably all have given the same response 1 billion times to their millions and millions of audience, where they'll probably say, of course that's not the case. Everyone's beautiful the way they are. This is just something I personally like to do. Okay, on to the points. Point one, why the self-care movement's beauty messaging is often really empowering for women. One, practical benefits. If self-care's goal is to help its followers live their lives, unfortunately, passing some beauty standards is sometimes a part of doing so. This is because, really unfortunately, these beauty standards exist and are a tool, and being able to manipulate those beauty standards and know how to deal with them and fit within them is a tool that is at least sometimes useful for people to understand the mechanisms of how to engage in. What this looks like is you being less likely to hire if you don't dress up or look presentable, because there exists a sexist man hiring you. What this means is that when we give them this tool and kind of teach them how to engage within the system, we give them the best possible packaging. Why is this? Why is this? Well, one, because it provides comfortable in your own skin rhetoric instead of here's how to here's how to be a good person type rhetoric with good looks. Because this content is held accountable to critics, as I've established, it means that it's going to be looks are going to be a lot less make or break for the importance of how good a person is or whatever. And it's going to be a lot more relaxed, laid back. This is just how it is because it's entwined with beauty standards and patriarchy. I think a lot of these content creators, as feminist content creators, would straight up point this out as well, which means we're mixing in a lot of positive feel-good ideas for the viewers. Sure.
Do you not think it's harmful for makeup companies to tell young girls that they would feel better and more relaxed if only they tried to be prettier?
Really depends on the context. Again, as we've talked about, like, I think that there is some cases where people don't wear makeup to like look good for other people, but instead because it makes them feel good. I think there are a lot of people who like dress up and look good not for like male attention or whatever, just because that's like a really good feeling thing. And I think they've really failed to demonstrate why that's a bad thing. Why like it isn't empowering to go dress up, look good, have fun, like looking good with your friends and hanging out with like a bunch of other women. There's no real push there. All right. So what that means again is that we've got a lot more like feminist messaging mixed within our thing when like teen girls, etc., would click onto that. And it also means that it's going to be a lot more talking about how it's beauty is skin deep. It's not skin deep. You're good on the inside. That this is just like for creativity, whatever. But also, this brings me on to my third kind of like mechanism for this, is that makeup and beauty is actually sometimes just a good thing. Like, I'm going to extend here and say that in many cases, this messaging is true. I think it is fair that there are millions of women who wear makeup and like dress up and enjoy these things. Just because it's fun and cool to do, it's like maybe not to just appeal to the opposite sex or look really good. They just like enjoy it, and I really don't see a problem with that. We consume a lot of things. Like you go drink a Coke, it might not be there. Like you might lose a bit of money, but it's fun to do. It's like good, entertaining, and I think we should allow women to have that avenue to express themselves, to engage creatively with makeup, to dress up, to have that kind of fun. On to the point two, and this also again, that encourages positive behaviours, because beauty routines aren't just makeup and skincare products. What this also looks like is exercising to be keeping fit, drinking water for clear skin, and getting like 8 hours of sleep for like bags under your eyes or whatever. What this means is that these self-care like beauty things are also really good for people's just mind, spirit, and body as well. And because people are motivated by looks, because there is like this cultural zeitgeist where somebody might Google like how to clear up my acne or whatever, when it's a self-care influencer who one tells you, you know what, it's okay to look this way, and two, drink a bunch of water, exercise, all these things are really positive. What that means is that they actually do get physical benefits, like when we talk about yoga or whatever, we actually get this with beauty messaging. So proud to stand on the side of positive action. Thank you.
We thank the speaker for an excellent speech and invite the second speaker of the affirmative to continue their next case.
The negating side defends the status quo. A status quo where there are no harmful narratives to women. A status quo where women are objectified. Women are treated badly when they look ugly. A society where women are... where there are many different ways in which women are being treated badly. However, they tell us that, there are feminist narratives, and this counters all these negative patriarchal narratives. This is simply not enough, and we see this in the status quo. We see these narratives in movies. We see the movies where, the girl takes off her glasses, and suddenly everyone likes her more because she is pretty, because she has more value. It is incredibly unrealistic to say that, these narratives are just going to be pushed back. And so much of the negating team's case relies on this. It relies on these narratives somehow managing to be positive just because women who are feminists exist. Three things to talk about today. First, on characterization. Second, on whether or not beauty standards are good. And third, my substantive contribution on how this rise has severely impaired the feminist movement. Okay, first on characterization. What are self-care images likely to look at? First, we heard that self-care influencers are likely to care, right? Because they want other people to feel good. First of all, we've already told you self-care influencing is a way to get money, right? Self-care influencing is a way where women who have been taught like they need to wear makeup and they know how to do makeup and it's something that they're really, really good at, know that they can make some money. This does not necessarily mean they inherently care about their viewers anyway. This is a completely alternative incentive that a huge number of these influencers are likely to have, and therefore they're not going to try and introduce any kind of positive narratives. They're simply looking to make money. Secondly, however, just because these people care, just because they have the incentive to help these people, does not mean they have the capacity to. I've already told you that there is this like this societal narrative and stuff like that being beautiful is really, really great and makes you more valuable and stuff like that. But these people do not necessarily know that that is really, really harmful, right? We've already told you that it's like that it's such an insidious narrative, that it's such a huge part of society that they're not necessarily going to be fighting back against that. And you see this in the status quo, right? You don't see a makeup video and they're like, oh, just a reminder, guys, this is slightly unfamous. But more importantly, we heard, oh yeah, uniquely bad things are pushed back. However, what we've been telling you is that beauty standard, is that all of these kind of like beauty influencing and stuff like that, beauty routines are all bad. They are all the uniquely bad things that they claim, right? Because they rest on this idea and this expectation that women need to wear makeup, that women need to look good, that women are more valuable when they look good. And so it's incredibly unrealistic to suggest that these bad narratives won't exist and completely doesn't engage with all of the harms that we told you arise from these expectations. Okay, secondly, just on people looking for self-care, even if this could somehow introduce them into these other self-care narratives. Okay, firstly, it's unlikely that the people that they're looking at, as I've already said, they don't necessarily have the incentive, but also the people find niches, right? People are going to talking about their makeup thing. However, not every single influencer, and actually most people don't actually talk about a bunch of different things, a bunch of different like beauty self-care things. It's people find niches much more specific than that so that they can find their audiences more directly and become more popular. But just in general, people like feeling good either way. We've told you the self-care narrative is obviously a huge thing, right? Because people want to try and feel better. They're looking for a quick fix. They're looking for a way to feel better. Because when you feel sad, that really sucks, and you want to try and figure out a way to make it better. So you go to the internet and you ask. These people are not just going to a lot of the time people are going to be looking for these things anyway, especially in an era where people just ask the internet for lots of things a lot. Okay, moving on to whether or not beauty standards are good. Okay, Nick told us that beauty standards are not necessarily inherently harmful because people are more beautiful, they feel good, right? They feel this good. But we already told you this feeling good is temporary, and what it actually leads to is long-term self-esteem issues. Because if you think the idea that you can be better in one situation necessitates the idea that you are worse than the other, right? If you are prettier with makeup, that means by definition that you are less pretty when you aren't. And you feel that every day, right? Because if people are telling you that you're pretty when you are wearing makeup, or pretty when you're having take your glasses off or whatever, and then you will always know, and you will always know that you are less pretty. And those other times, you feel less valuable in and of yourself. You feel like the actual person who you are when you are not showing these things to other people is incredibly inferior. And because this is the real person that you are, and you're likely to connect heavily with yourself. This leads to really, really low self-esteem. I'll also go into later how all these beauty standards also impact the way men see women. We also heard that. We also heard that beauty being skin isn't necessarily skin deep, and that beauty routines and stuff and things like exercise and stuff like that necessarily counts. Things like exercise and sleep are essential parts of human life that we need to live. They are essential parts of self-care, and they are not innately connected to beauty in any harmful ways, and it's harmful when they are connected to beauty, because then people might, they're likely to exist on either side of the house. Right. Them being connected to beauty has no actual impact on the way they happen. I'll take a few right now.
Can makeup ever be a legitimate form of artistic expression?
If you want to have artistic expression, then you can paint it on a canvas. There is nothing particularly unique about makeup, right? Except for the huge amounts of harms. It might be a bit fun to put some makeup on. However, there are a million things that you can do in this world that are really, really fun, and we're telling you that this one perpetuates harmful stereotypes that hurt women and that hurt society. Okay, moving into my substantive contribution on how this rise has severely impaired the feminist movement. Okay, what is the counterfactual, right? The counterfactual for this narrative is that feminist women and other women, in general on social media, start try to delegitimize beauty standards, try to teach people that that they do not necessarily have to conform to these beauty standards, and for a few reasons. First, and social media has uniquely helped people share these experiences, and this is uniquely would have come to rise for a few reasons. First, because of the huge volume of communication that we've seen, that we see on social media. It's accessible at all times. So much content, hours of videos that you can easily create, easily consume. It's also an incredibly personal kind of communication, right? Because you have a sense of distance between you and your viewers. And this means that people are more likely to be a lot more personal because they don't have that feeling of embarrassment that they might feel when they're talking to people in person. They can also, the anonymity also allows like this kind of increased honesty. We see this generally, anonymity in many situations allows people to be more honest. But also really huge numbers of people exist on the internet, right? Huge numbers of people talk about these narratives. Okay, what does this lead to? These many different experiences that people would see in the counterfactual are likely to lead to things like inconsistencies. People realize that beauty standards are actually really harmful because they see that different people feel insecure about really different things, and that doesn't necessarily connect with your actual self-worth, and they're likely to relate and empathize to other women's experiences, and therefore see how harmful it is and how much it is hurting people because they see how insecure and bad these people feel about their appearance. This leads to the overcoming of necessity for women to follow these standards, which, as I said, looks like messaging would look like messaging in movies that you don't need to fit in these standards, and that you are valid without them. However, this messaging is severely overshadowed and outright devalued by the rise of these beauty routines, right? First, Harris has already told you that it's completely the opportunity cost of all the self-care is really harmful, but also it's devalued because these contradicting ideas that beauty standards are good and beauty standards are bad creates division with the feminist movement, means people trust this movement less, trust what they are saying less, and therefore, don't listen to feminists as much.
We thank the speaker for an excellent speech and invite the second speaker of the negating team to continue their discussion.
Canterbury won the debate today as soon as we brought you material about why we actually do get these self-care benefits that AFF came out and said that we just can't get at very late in their second half speech, and which I will show you later on in my speech, and Ethan has already kind of talked about. Two things I will do for you in my speech today. Firstly, a clash around what beauty looks like and the characterization, because there seems to be quite a difference between both teams, and then secondly an outcomes on the viewers of this beauty content. Within this, I'll be extending on my first speaker in terms of my substantive contribution. So firstly, on what self-care looks like. What we brought you here is that note this trend is largely carried by social media and TikTok and posts on Instagram. So what it really looks like self-care influencers talking about feel good, not about it look good, which is majority of what F's case relies on. We've already told you that we're focused on what's how people feel good. It looks like influencers talking about how their own experiences with acne and stuff like that, and how to deal with it, and why this doesn't matter. A lot of this content involves is why all this acne and all this societal expectations and why that's so bad is is not true, and then they provide some ways that people can deal with it if they still feel bad about it. They tell you, hey, you could maybe go for a run, to feel better about yourself, not to fix this acne and make them look better. Maybe you can drink some water, that might make you feel better, get more sleep, stuff like that. We don't actually see what they're suggesting, that just objectively looking better, something that they're we think they've characterized completely wrong from the start of their case. Okay, we also told you that we in terms of characterization, people, these self-care influencers, they do care. They consider themselves that they do care, which means that if they care, they're largely, even if they're getting money with it, we tell you that mental health, talking about mental health and stuff, it comes with money. It's not having that money there just distracts from the fact that those influencers do care. And we tell you that if they do care, then they will have positive impacts on the viewers that are watching them. So that's not that big of a harm that AFF is claiming it to be. Okay. Also, I think it's like important to note like what like the comparative of what like self-care kind of looks like on their side. On their side, like these beauty routines, like when they're like all this like stuff is like beauty routines, like when all this stuff is like destroyed, we see like people got like searching up, like teens searching up how to deal with acne, that like same scenario, but instead they're getting like ways on like use this like cream or something like that. This is like really important because these ways are like just like only going to be a harm on their side, because on our side what we largely see is that these content creators do post some like stuff around like societal expectations and do talk about like why they're bad, whereas on their side they just talk about like how to cope with it. So it's going to be largely symmetrical that we see both those like people talking about like how to deal with it, but we also see like people talking about like why that societal expectation is bad and how you can actually feel good about it rather than just look good. Okay. We also, in terms of characterization, like a lot of like their material, I would just like to say, was like quite narrowing. They said like that that it's like just like makeup. We brought you like lots of material like skincare and like just like wellness things, mindfulness things. We think they've like narrowed this quite a lot. But like just talking about it, like if we be charitable with them, we think that still beauty standards like symmetric on both sides. However, even more harmful on their side, because again, once again, like these influencers can no longer actively post because this trend in culture does not exist, and instead we only have material that talks about how to look good. We think it's like better to focus on like how one feels, which is something they can't really claim because that is like exclusive to like the content creators that are like following this trend and are only like incentivized by this trend, where they actually can like reach out to their viewers and talk about their own experience, which is something they largely won't do on their side of the house. No, thank you. So at the end of this, I think like we have heard like AF quite mischaracterizing this, like what self-care trends look like. Just on that, I think we like win this debate, but like I'm just going to even further the margin to talk about like what the outcomes of viewers are on like seeing on this content. So I'll take the feel like.
If covering up acne is seen as self-care, what happens to the perception of people who don't do that?
Well, for the perception of people that don't do that, I think like once again this is like mischaracterization. They're not really talking about acne. I kind of told you we were talking about how to feel good even if you had that acne. It's not about like trying to cover it up. It's more about like how, okay, if I'm feeling bad about myself with my acne, like content creators talking about like instead I do like these 3 things to like make myself feel good. I go out with my friends to like watch a movie. I go and have like go on a walk with my dog or something like that. We don't see it's largely that it's just about covering it up, and we see that that claim they're trying to push on us about like covering it up is largely symmetrical on both sides. So if they like poses harm on us, they also have to accept that this harm exists on their side. Okay, so on the second clash on like the outcomes of the viewers. So here we heard like a lot like how the content won't be positive and stuff, but we've already like given you some reasons, but I'll extend on this as to like why the content will be positive. So like firstly, people will be cancelled. Generally cancel culture does exist, and people that like go against and like try pose these like really unrealistic standards will be like get backlash by like feminists and stuff like that, as we've kind of brought out. And these beauty standards are just like generally not accepted. This is like kind of what used to happen in the past, not really happening right now. People do stand against it. And like secondly, even if they are cancelled, they're just like heavily attacked by viewers. What this means is like they have less views now. They're like not as like going as viral, not as many people see it, not that much of an impact. Thirdly, we tell you like sponsors drop them. So like this whole thing they talked about like makeup sponsors and stuff like that, they like drop them because they don't want to be like seen as supporting all these like negative standards, because like what we see that like these days is these makeup companies don't want to be associated with being like posing standards that are harmful, because generally lots of them are like supporting the feminist movement. So we see that they actually want to be like they show like, oh, ways to make you feel good, and they like show this is like an alternative that you can do, not something that you must do, and something that we like we think that they can't really claim. And then also just want to talk about this like example they gave about like taking off glasses and stuff, and how you all of a sudden seem prettier, and that's like why that's so bad. I think this was like pretty contradictory material, and it's actually beneficial to our side, because firstly, you're like, if you see this like these type of movies, you likely see like content creators talk about this and talk about like why it's so bad and why it's so untrue. Secondly, we think like teen girls, generally like the main stakeholder there, like 13 to like 17-year-olds, they're like likely to be able to see when like a girl's wearing like glasses and then like freckles like with makeup all over her face, to like when she's got like hair curled and everything. There's like a large difference, and we think it's like quite visible for like people to see the difference between them, and we don't think that this like example is relatively important, big on their side that they've claimed, but it's actually better for our side because we actually get the discourse on it. People do talk about it. If more people talking about it, then we have like more acceptance of it, which is like overall better. Okay, also we like told you on this, like they brought this point on like inequity and how like people can't afford it and like makes poor people like feel bad. I would just like to note like lots of the examples we gave like does not like require money, like going like having like a like content creators saying like look out like and have like go for a walk and stuff like that does not require money. But secondly, like we also tell you that like this like perpetuating myth they're talking about is like largely like also symmetrical on their side, because if like content creators, like if viewers go in online and search it up, they're still gonna have that, and largely it'll be worse for minorities because on our side we have like content creators which talk about this, whereas on their side it's just about like, hey, this is how you need to really look good, whereas on our side it's just like, oh, even if you don't have this, here's like another thing you could do. At the end of this, I think we actually propose Canterbury stands for like a for standards where like beauty standards are actually discussed and like accepted more in general, whereas like NEG AFF stands for like a case where they're like all really butchered and everyone feels like bad about it.
We thank the speaker for an excellent speech, and we invite the second speaker of the third speaker, sorry, of the affirming team to continue their introduce this.
Sorry. Historically, beauty standards have been rampant, oppressive, hurtful, telling people they aren't beautiful because they don't look a certain way. Now, with the self-care narrative, now it's telling people they also don't look beautiful if they don't look a certain way, but that means they also don't take care of themselves. We see this as insidious and disgusting. We think that beauty standards have been hidden under the guise of self-care, telling people that they aren't taking care of themselves because they don't look a certain way, because they haven't done like this 10 billion step beauty routine. These are just beauty standards hidden under the guise of self-care. We think this is anti-feminist and this is oppressive. They told us from the get-go that, oh, it's such a shame, it's quite unfortunate. We are passing down some standards via doing this. Oh well, we tell you this is the problem, this is the root of the problem, and we tell you it's far more insidious at the point you have it under the guise of self-care. We told you at Virginia that it actively made the feminist movement a lot more difficult to try to tackle the shackles of oppression. At the point with feminist movement, it was garnering things like tackling beauty standards, but then you had some internal conflict at the point some feminists were like, but it makes me feel beautiful. We think they've been deluded by the oppressions of society, been deluded by the things they were expected to look like, deluded by the fact men and society growing up have told them, if you're not beautiful, you don't deserve respect. At that point, when you had that internal conflict, the feminist movement weakened. We tell you, we much prefer it if women didn't think they would feel happy or get any intrinsic joy from looking or doing like a beauty routine or putting on foundation. We think it is far more insidious. We think we have more imposition of standards to look a certain way. We think we both conceded in this debate that they're inherently intertwined. This looks like, we told you down the line, things like cleanliness, a spotless face, light skin, makeup, certain beauty features to look a certain way, telling young women that there's something wrong with you, and if you don't fix it, A, you're not taking care of yourself, but B, you don't fit into these new beauty impositions, new beauty standards. We do not stand for that on this side of the house. Okay, a couple things to do in my speech. First of all, on the imposition of standards, and second of all, the feminist movement, and third of all, which side actually makes people feel better? Okay, I'll start with that one actually. So they told us that people will just generally feel better because they feel prettier. A couple
couple responses. First of all, the causation. We just reject it on the premise. We think the whole reason people were feeling bad in the first place was because of these standards, because of the fact they were told, you're ugly, you don't take care of yourself. Like, oh, this woman, she doesn't even take care of herself, she's so ugly. We think the reason she feels bad and the reason she feels like she could feel better at the point she wears makeup is because of these standards. Second thing, we think this is artificially feeling better, even if you do feel better. It's bowing down to these oppressions, and they never fully explain the fact that these standards imposed of self-care, well, are an illusion of like perfection. This looks like the beauty routines, and this looks like the makeup. Because of the commercialization at the point, you constantly have that corporate aim to keep selling consumers goods. At that point, you constantly have that treadmill toward trying to sell people more. Third thing, this is a short, fleeting moment, even if they do feel good, at the point until L'Oreal or Dior comes out with a new foundation or a new lipstick, and then they feel ugly again, and they feel like they don't take care of themselves again. Huge harm. At least on their side of the house. Furthermore, it's extremely exclusionary. Notice how they conveniently didn't talk about this. We tell you in the utility calculus, yes, maybe some people feel artificially slightly more happy for a short amount of time because of the oppressions that they've managed to overcome because they bought more makeup, versus those literally excluded at the point they are poor, they can't afford a 10-step skincare routine, they're minorities, and they don't fit into this mold. They feel far worse, and this is the greatest impact in this debate today, because we think beauty standards, we regret it so much because we think beauty standards would have been overcome a lot more easily at the point we didn't have it under the guise of self-care. Furthermore, we just think people feel far more worse at the point now they also feel ugly, but now they're also told they don't care for themselves, putting more blame on them rather than just not doing that. But let me go further to explain actually why no one feels happy. We think, they constantly feel like they have to meet up to the standards. They never do. But we also think like the tangible harms. At the point we told you, Chris, like the financial harms, because either the people who are poor don't buy it, they're fully excluded. They never have a path to getting that self-care, that actual good things like movies and yoga, because it's been crowded out. I'll explain that later. But even if you do buy it, you now tangibly have less disposable income to do things like mindfulness, to do things like reading books, or like going and getting ice cream with your children. We think this is much more better on our side of the house. We also think the self-care narrative is inherently built off of insecurities. At the point you have makeup now, and people are telling you, okay, you need to buy makeup because you need to self-care. It is far more insidious. At the point now you're telling people it is more than skin deep, because you need to wear makeup to look pretty, but also you need to feel better. At the point you bow down to this societal oppressions. We absolutely do not stand for that on this side of the house. We think that a girl with acne, she probably would have already tried things to reduce it just because it's really annoying to have on your face. But we do not need society to look down upon her now for not taking care of herself just because she's going through like a hormonal time. We think this is absolutely ridiculous. We think it's better on our side of the house. And furthermore, we think that they told us, what does this messaging look like? First of all, I'm really sorry about the structure, guys. Please don't kill me. What does this messaging look like? We think that they told us that it would be like, your beauty is skin deep. You're beautiful no matter what. I think this is just messaging coming from them to make it sound better. We think, first of all, it's far more insidious at the point. It sounds like it's soul deep, because now you have that outward skincare, but now you have to have makeup to actually make you feel good. So like the fact that you have to feel good because you're bowing down to the fact that you look better because people think that that's how you should look, far worse. But we also think that like, you can't be beautiful no matter what and then try to sell a product. If they're trying to make it about influencers, why are they influencers? Why are they getting sponsorships in the first place? Guess what, guys? To sell a product. So we think it's inherently built off of exploiting insecurities people already have. We would far prefer a world where we didn't have this, where beauty standards would actually be much more diluted and less rampant, at the point people could easily contradict the standard, at the point they're like, hey, this doesn't even make me feel good in the first place. But then they told us that self-care influencers will also magically be mental health advocates. 4 things. First of all, these are influencers. Second of all, they want to do this to gain money / clout. Third of all, corporations are always involved with this because how do they get this money? And fourth of all, they're literally not mental health experts. It's not true and pretty ridiculous. Then they told us that if you take care of yourself and you practice self-care by putting on makeup, you'll just feel better. You'll be packaged better for society. First of all, why do you need to be packaged better for society? Why can't you just be like good in the way you look? Why can't you be like what Chris said earlier? Why can't a woman who is confident with not wearing makeup, why does she have to feel like she's not taking care of herself now? Why can't she feel like that? Why do we have to have that standard imposed on her? Furthermore, we think that if you have the norm, you have people being like, you have to change the way you look to look a certain way to appease everyone else. Further propagations of these inherently evil harms. Then they told us that, okay, at the end of this, they told, oh wait, can I have a point, please?
Sure. do you think that every single person who's a self-care influencer is a hateful person who wants to make others
No,
feel
definitely not. But we think we can have those good people in our side of the house. We can have people like, hey, this is how you feel better. I drink water every day. This is really good. But we don't need this standard propagated at the point these influencers literally exploit your insecurities by telling you, you need to buy this product, not only because it'll make you look a certain way, but the way you look will make you feel happier. Then they told us artistic expression. I think this is the last thing standing in their case. First of all, this doesn't have to fall under the guise of self-care. We think people can do makeup for fun if they want to. Like, it doesn't have to be self-care. We don't have to tell people this will make you feel good if you do it. We think we can be like, all right, you can do your makeup thing. It doesn't have to be under the guise of self-care, and it doesn't have those beauty standards that get more rampant. But we also think the huge harm here, right, is that at the point you have this movement focusing on self-care and in the form of beauty and makeup, you actually crowd out other alternatives to self-care, like doing things like yoga, doing things like going with your family. At the point you are deluded and thinking that you're taking care of yourself by putting on makeup, so you don't feel incentivized to go do other things because you're constantly on that treadmill trying to feel better, trying to look better. You think that'll make you feel happier, but it makes you feel worse in the long term. You impact the people that are literally the most vulnerable at the point they can't afford this. They're locked out. They don't try things that might actually help them, that might actually be accessible for them. That is why the movement must do something.
We thank the speaker for an excellent speech, and we invite the first speaker of the engagement team to close out this inflammatory portion.
I don't think it was enough for side F today to just come out and talk about how all these things will perpetrate really negative effects on society without actually explaining the structural reasons and providing actual framework in this debate for why the self-care movement is inherently negative. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to actually discuss what these self-care influences, what the self-care movement looks like, what the counterfactual is, and on the basis of that, I'll work on to discussing self-care and then societal expectations and inequities as the 2 points of clash. Right. What does the self-care movement look like in this debate? I think we've come out very strongly right down our line and discussed why this will be a largely positive movement. I think we don't actually see any direct engagement from them. We just hear that, oh, it will be negative because people are forcing people to feel bad and stuff like that. I have 7 reasons here why it's likely to be generally helpful content overall for most creators. Number 1, I think there's cancel culture. No, the fact that it's a feminist adjacent movement means there's likely to be higher pressure for these content creators to generally be positive people. There's more accountability for them if they aren't, and if they're perpetrating these harmful body standards. Secondly, I think sponsors will drop them if they are a bad person. No, this addresses their very uncharitable framing of what these content creators look like. Since if they are a really negative person who's just shilling products, they're going to be held accountable for sponsors. Since the sponsors don't want to be sponsoring someone who's really bad, that will cause them to act good, to perpetrate these positive stuff, positive mental imaging and stuff like that. Thirdly, I think viewers will generally want to be positive, and since the viewership demands it, that means we will likely see these content creators be really positive, try and enforce generally positive imaging and stuff like that. And I think fourthly, just given the topic, they're generally likely to be more positive people. And then fifthly, I think they'll probably be banned if you're really hateful and if you're bullying people based on their appearance, if you're a content creator. Sixthly, you'll just receive less viewers. And then once again, seventhly, since it's a feminist adjacent movement, there's additional preference for them to add here. Right. So I think on the basis of this, a lot of their harms that they've like perpetrated throughout this debate relies on the assumption that these content creators are actually bad people. There is no accountability mechanisms for them to be positive in society. I think the only actual structural reason that they came up in response is around like financial incentives and stuff like that. Let's deal with like the financial incentives here. I think number one, I think quite often what these creators look like, since they are talking about self-care, since they're opening up about personal experiences, they're likely to be very authentic with their content. This means they're more likely to like take brand deals with brands who they agree with, who they think are good, who they think are like enforcing positive changes and positive influences on society. This means we're unlikely to see what they claim to be happening with like these brand deals forcing really negative things, since the brands are likely to like align with their vision. And then I think like secondly here, I think we're like less likely to see them just like shove brands down their throat and stuff like that. So I don't think this like monetization really holds water, specifically in the realm of like self-care. Yes.
If a teenage girl thinks that self-care is just makeup and skincare, how will she ever delve into things that could actually productively help her, like reading or spending time with her family?
I think we've like really thoroughly dealt with that down our case insofar as that these self-care YouTubers don't just, self-care YouTubers and TikTokers or whatever, do not just talk about makeup. We've mentioned that at all three speeches. You didn't really seem to acknowledge that that was said. Right, now about the counterfactual and what content actually looks like on Outside the House. Note, we came out at Ethan with this, we saw no response. What we said here is that like the fact that there is like on their side of the house, people will still be looking for makeup content, except now all of a sudden, since the self-care like trend and stuff is like regrettable and no longer existing, this will likely force them down into like beauty YouTubers. YouTubers who don't focus on self-care but focus on makeup. This is infinitely more harmful since these people likely have these profit motives from these bad companies since they aren't focused on self-care. They're likely generally negative people because they're like focusing on like beauty instead of self-care. It's far more preferable that we engage with the self-care YouTubers. Okay. Right, why does this matter? I think we've shown that like not every influencer is the same. In fact, we're likely to have like generally more positive YouTubers, and I think the basis for a lot of their substantive material relied on them proving that these YouTubers are negative. They didn't do that. We're ahead in this debate since we have positive YouTubers on our side of the house. Right, now to self-care. The main claim they try to push here is that like there are these look good, feel good narratives, and that like this is an inherently bad thing. Three responses here. Number one, I think even if I think it just is like a fundamental fact that on some level, if you are exercising, if you are drinking water, if you like have higher self-esteem because your like body looks nicer because of these things that these influencers are pushing, you are likely to feel better because of this, because you are generally healthier. Secondly, I think self-care people still talk about societal expectations, as once again we've clearly characterized that the majority of these self-care content creators are positive people. They're likely to address these like societal expectations and stuff like that and push back on them. This means that we don't see as much societal expectations. It's more focused on yourself and like enhancing yourself, not just on like there's one thing, one niche you need to fit. And I think the alternative here is, as we've outlined in the counterfactual, is looking good is feeling good. It's infinitely more preferable on our side of the house. Right, the second push here, the second claim we hear from them here is about like this content pressure. First of all, I think there's no structural analysis about why these content creators are negative for the structural pressure to exist. And I think even if it does on our side of the house, since we've shown that they are like positive content creators, and there's like a positive avenue for people to leave this pressure and stuff like that. Okay. The next claim we hear is that it like prevents people from seeking positive or other care. I think this relied on them actually proving that it is solely makeup and solely like stuff like that that they are pushing. I think we've outlined that generally it's a holistic point of view that these like content creators push from. That means they're likely to promote a variety of views, a variety of like methods to improve like yourself on our side of the house. We don't see people pushing just like self-care. Right, sorry, we don't see people just pushing makeup as a form of self-care. Right, what we see here is I think we generally see better self-care outcomes for individuals since they're interacting with like the self-care movement online that is really positive, that largely consists of good individuals. Right, now into societal expectations. Their first push here is that inequities are like perpetuated. Note, I think when we dealt with a lot of their like monetization drive issues, this means that there isn't like this massive, a lot of their like content creators being drove by monetary reasons. I think because we dealt with that at the start of this speech, I think there's unlikely to be these really high price gaps on this stuff. So I think a lot of this doesn't stand. Three responses, even if you do believe there is these paragraphs. Number one, as we outlined at Angum, not everything needs money to not every technique that these people offer needs money for you to engage with it. This means that even if you are from a lower socioeconomic background, you can still engage with these positive self-care movements. Number two, I think societal inequities and stuff like that are things that self-care YouTubers can exclusively promote since they have this reach, since they have this large audience. That means that they are likely in their viewership are people who believe really negative societal expectations and stuff. They can push back on that. And thirdly, I think we see a unique benefit here insofar as that there's likely minority-oriented or lower socioeconomic-oriented content creators that can uniquely address these inequities that exist in the status quo. Okay. Now, I think we provided a slew of benefits into how it lowers oppression and stuff of negative societal body standards and stuff like that. We saw very little engagement at second and third on this content that came out right at Ethan. A lot of that still stands. So at the end of this debate, because these people are positive influences, we've shown that right down our line, we're likely to see really positive outcomes for people on our side of the house. So proud.
We thank the speaker for an excellent speech and invite the leader of the engagement team to give their reply.
See, now is hopefully the point of the movie where the glasses-wearing protagonist takes them off and everything goes their way. Alright, what harms did affirmative try to win this debate on? Well, I think I'm going to put these back on, I need to see, is that it creates a narrative that taking care of appearance is taking care of himself, and this perpetuates negative beauty standards. This is the core of what we're trying to win on. If we sufficiently mitigate this, then effectively the main leading thrust is pretty much taken out of the debate. So then have we done this? Yes. First off, we've told you that in some cases, actually taking care of your appearance is taking care of yourself. We gave you the example of exercise, we gave you the example of sleep, we gave you the example of drinking water. And further, all of these things not only help you look better, but also help you feel better and help you spiritually and physically. We told you that also because there are a big market of people looking for these kind of image helping type content, that uniquely these self-care content creators who direct people to all these other things mean we get more exercise, sleep and water type things on our side of the house. But what we've also told you is that actually it can be good for your mental health as well, in the sense that once you've kind of taken away the patriarchal assumption that you're wearing makeup, etc., to look good for the male gaze, but instead you put on makeup for the first time with a different mindset that it's actually just for you and your own self-expression, something you really enjoy. That actually that's a really fulfilling, fun, and entertaining thing that isn't which is honestly pretty good for someone's mental health. It's good to have fun things in people's lives, even if you have to pay for them. We gave you the example of a glass of Coke. Nothing wrong with that. Furthermore, we've also told you that when it does go too far and does try to push these narratives, it is largely mitigated by the fact that these self-care movements are so entwined with feminism that cancel culture mechanisms would come into place and fight back there. We even extended here and said that because feminist messaging is so entwined with these movements, that these messages will be mixed in, and if somebody searches up how to do a certain eyeliner technique or whatever, we suddenly also get feminist messaging in, encouraging them that this is just for fun, this is you shouldn't be doing it for men, what you should actually be doing it for yourself. We consider this really positively. But so at the end of that, I think we're saying that they've kind of really marginally proved any harm of self-care influencers doing things. But here's where our path to victory comes in. That they've done all this narrative building about the insecure teen searching, seeing the glasses removal movie, turning to the internet and Googling makeup tutorials or whatever. We're going to tell you why that the counterfactual, when it's not self-care influencers making these videos, but actually just general beauty influencers making these videos, when people click on them, is way, way worse. What we're going to tell you is that what happens is it's not it makes you feel better, it's a good thing for your feelings. Looking good is feeling good. It tells you that looking good is being good. That beauty is a goal in and of itself. Aesthetic beauty is not something in relation to your feelings and cultural narratives or whatever, and it's not entwined with feminism. It is the definition of good. This is tremendously bad. All of the harms they try to push on us are 10 times worse if you buy that it's not mitigated by feminism. They're not putting in these positive movements. and all these other things. Furthermore, we've got a bunch of tiebreaker mechanisms if you don't even buy this counterfactual, and the fact that we provide more traffic to other self-care methods, and the fact that if these are self-care influencers, they talk about all kinds of self-care, right, almost definitionally. What this means is that when they have other videos, if you really like their first video on beauty tutorials, then you might like their yoga videos, their reading videos, their mindfulness videos. We funnel those girls searching those things up into those positive places. Furthermore, it provides a safe space to provide tools for dealing with the patriarchy. We gave you the job search example. There are some situations where you need to have these tools, really sadly, and so we provide them in a safe package. Furthermore, we told you that there are just health benefits for some of these messaging, again, drinking, etc., drinking water, getting 8 hours of sleep, etc. And finally, we told you that makeup is just fun. It's just a really good source of fulfillment, entertainment, and self-expression that millions and millions of people enjoy just for its own sake, that I don't think should be booed and made down by the team just because some people abuse it. Thank you so much.
Next speaker speech, and we invite the leader of the affirming team to finish today's debate.
What side opposition today misses is that we aren't anti-self-care. We are extremely in favor of the things that they themselves alluded to, like reading, or going for a walk, or mindfulness. We are against what they have to defend, and that is the insidious use of makeup and beauty under the guise of self-care. 3 issues for this debate. First, on the effect on societal expectations. Second, on the effect on forms of self-care. Finally, on the effect on inequities. First, on expectations. This point is important because this is the issue that addresses what impressionable people are going to experience as a result of the narrative, right? It means it is the issue that determines whether or not the beauty as part of self-care has influenced people's thinking. Okay. What do we hear from opposition? We heard that it is okay and it hasn't worsened standards of beauty for broadly 2 reasons. The first is to say that they tell us that we have existent feminist narratives that work to counteract this, and flowing on to the second reason, that there will be backlash and a constant pressure against this at the point you are perpetuating a harmful beauty narrative. What have we told you instead? We have told you that things like the feminist narrative have been actively harmed by beauty as a part of self-care, because now there is this division between the movement, between whether or not things like makeup are inherently bad. We tell you it is because of the fact it's built on this patriarchal standard. The problem is when it's as part of self-care, you have messaging, for instance, that it's a part of taking care of yourself, not just to look aesthetically beautiful. And we note here they didn't engage with the mechanisms I gave you at first, such as, most crucially, that these are often just the repackaged makeup and beauty that already existed before, only now promoted as self-care as opposed to aesthetics. That means you haven't actually changed the standard. You haven't changed the fact that people feel like they have to wear them. All you've done is it makes them feel like they have to do it even more. Things like the person with acne feeling they need to address it as a form of self-care, otherwise they aren't taking care of themselves. What this means is the effects on societal expectations are even worse at the point you have fake self-care under the guise of self-care, because it's no longer as clear whether it's about aesthetics. It is portrayed as being about taking care of oneself. It really isn't. It's extremely harmful for everyone in society, especially those people seeing this narrative. We think that this is enough to win us the debate. But second, then, let's look at the effect on forms of self-care. This point is important because it speaks to how these beauty routines have shaped other forms of self-care. First, I'd like to note here that the response that we get from opposition is that makeup can be good. Okay, our response to this was to deal with it by saying it isn't necessarily true, right? And we think in the vast majority of instances this isn't the case. But even for skincare, where it can be good, we think there is enough messaging already to have people wash their face. We don't think this as part of self-care narrative was necessary. But the second was, they give us that it flows onto other forms of self-care, that these self-care influences will lead to other things. But they broadly just assert this by saying that you will be directed at other things because obviously they're a self-care influencer. That's not good enough to prove it, because we give you incentives like, for instance, the profit mechanism, that these influencers don't care about people, they care about the money that they get. It means that they won't push it to other forms of self-care because that detracts from their platform, that is to say, selling these products, getting these sponsorships from companies. They never address this. But even if it did have some marginal amount going to these other things, we told you this isn't necessary because they never challenged the counterfactual that other things would have arisen from the self-care movement in the absence of this, meaning that we still have the harms of societal expectations. They never actually give us a reason why beauty routines specifically leads to so much additional focus on the self-care narrative. We think this isn't true. The closest they get is analysis thrown out at third and leaders, which we think is too late to substantially contribute to the debate. We think that falls out and that we win the second issue as well. Finally, then quickly on inequities. We think it's important and goes largely unresponded to, again, until third, where they give us a mechanism about, for instance, different types of influences. We think this still doesn't stand because of the fact that we told you about things like poor people not being able to afford the self-care narrative, perpetuating expectations like that poor people just don't take care of themselves, and then forcing them to feel as though they have to, when in reality, they don't have to. And that is the fundamental problem, panel, because it's not about makeup necessarily being always bad. It's about it being bad if you tell people that's how you look, take care of yourself. It really isn't. How you take care of yourself is mindfulness, sleep, water, these things that aren't beauty routines. We stand strongly against beauty routines. Proud to oppose.
We thank the speaker for their speech and both speakers for an excellent debate. We invite you to cross the floor and shake hands, and because of this excitement, I'm free to go.
Good job.
Sorry, to get you for
That's a joke.
It's my bag. No, it's my bag right there. It's like the. I'm not going to finish this up.